what what were your kind of first introductions to music, and why are you doing this basically?
Why am I doing this? Well, I guess when I was really young, I discovered music through a couple of more esoteric mad uncles that were in my family. One of which sat me down and played me Beach Boys records at high volume, along with Eddie Cochran and people like that, and Stray Cats. And I think I was probably about eight years old then. My other uncle played me sort of Maggie May, Rod Stewart, and so from early years I was sort of like, that sounds amazing. Just to hear music loud for the first time. Then as sort of time moves on, teenager, started discovering bands around me at the time when I was at school, such as the Smiths, the Cure, Cocteau Twins, kind of people like that. Went to my first gigs in Oxford, in what was the new theatre, or the Apollo then, and sort of saw the Cult, bands like Big Country first time, just that first live experience of being at gigs, which from there on I kind of made which I thought was a sort of delusional childhood ambition, was that one day with my own band, or in a band myself, I will stand and sing in the Oxford New Theatre. Of course, never thinking I'd ever do that, let alone actually doing that about 5 years later. So that was my sort of childhood ambition. And it's just one of those things, you kind of look for things when you're a teenager. I was in a pretty dodgy old school in Oxford. It's a bit rough, and music just became my total friend and passion and life, and sort of still is really. I was never going to make it as a footballer, so, which is the other thought I had to escape the system. So and I guess I met Andy Bell at school. We then used to sort of get out of school as much as we could, go down and annoy intensely the music shop people, ABC Music, by sort of just playing guitars all the time down there and never buying anything. Then that was the seeds of what we then basically got into the same art school together, which was in Banbury, which we thought was a sign, not because we were going to become artists, but because what we'd read about, that all sort of decent bands had seemed to have been at art school together. And then we had an art foundation year at art school. During that period, we met Loz Colbert, the drummer. We already knew Steve Grout, who worked in the record shop in Oxford, who was a bass player. Myself and Andy were starting to write, and that was basically what became then Ride.
Awesome.
Which was, I guess that's all started happening. We were young. I mean, I was like 18, 19 when we first started meeting the likes of Alan McGee and all of that, sort of the merry circus that was Creation at that time. And bizarrely, we ended up, I think, being the first sort of group that signed with Creation Records at that point, that started hitting the charts really. And that was it for the next sort of 6-7 years. My life suddenly became touring, making records with Ride, world tours, and I have to say it was just a fantastic time of my life, that if I was that age again and had my options or whatever, I'd do it all again. It was absolutely brilliant. I mean, during that time, I suppose the real magic for me, and and it still is, was the whole thing, of course, them going into studios and making records. That was always just the thing that, that was it for me. There's just a whole magic that I still really feel with that. And it was a pleasure to sit alongside some of the. I mean, Ride kind of produced himself to a certain extent, but we were using great engineers and people that really knew what they were doing in the studio, with the likes of Alan Moulder, John Leckie, George Dekulius came on board as well at a certain point. And I used to really just sit with them at the desks and try and work out what they were doing.
You absorb it. Basically.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to know. I wanted to unravel the mystery a little bit, but also later day I did a lot of work with Sam Williams in the group after Ride, which is the Animal House, who did all the sort of Supergrass production. I think I was just on a mission really to try and understand it all really, without losing the magic, and it didn't actually enhance the magic, because then you realise, yeah, of course you can get your head around the gear and stuff, but at the end of the day it is still not an exact science, and there is a real alchemy and a bit of voodoo to sort of, in the end, when you say that's it, it's done, you know, with mixing and dealing with people and sounds and stuff, you know. So I think once you get that, there was definitely a bit of, you know, research that needed to be, you know, taken by myself to understand how to sort of generally work things, but then it's liberating again, because you're kind of then back to the same place of like, at what point do you sort of say that's it, you know, and that's a mix, and that's great. And you know, and the challenge really is now to sort of try and get the best out of every piece of music that, you know, or, you know, the files that were thrown my way from bands, and you know, to hopefully still try and make interesting music, you know.
And so you obviously got involved with this the Creation Records documentary.
Yeah.
I mean, how obviously you're obviously quite qualified to do it, but how did it come to you to be a you know, a composer of music for documentaries? Because that's
I'd kind of always been putting it out there that obviously I'd been gradually getting studios together with lots of toys and things that made sounds, so that I'd kind of got myself in a situation where I could potentially start to make more sort of soundtrack music. And also that's what I always had in mind, even with the Ride Days. I kind of realised that this existence isn't going to be forever, but I always sort of, I suppose in a way, because I guess the real sort of genius people that I'm inspired by are the Brian Eno's, you know, are the Ennio Morricone's, the John Barry's and Hans Zimmer. I mean, it just, you know, so I've always, I'm not a great film lover or whatever, but I just love the way that it, you know, music works with images and how...
That marriage.
Yeah, so I guess when I then got to meet the director of Upside Down, that was Danny O'Connor, obviously we met because he was interviewing me, because I was right in the middle of it in the Creation Days. And then I think as time went on for him, he kind of realised that, you know, aside from obviously the 2 tracks of Oasis that they could afford to pay for, and, you know, the 2 tracks of every band, there was lots of gaps and lots of stuff that needed to be filled, you know, with all the narrative. I kind of said, I can do that, and I'd love to do that. He said, well, I want you to do that because you were in the middle of it, and that was it. So I spent that sort of strange, good few months of last year under various instructions from a director and an editor to sort of, you know, to sort of make music that sounded purple and, you know, sort of what I mean, the bizarrest instruction, but which was great. And so strangely, there was a sort of like, I think you're a bit mad what you're telling me, but I sort of know what you mean. So at the end of it, it ended up working out really well, and of course, it far exceeded, as with the band thing did, and you know, the Upside Down thing, it exceeded our expectations of where it would travel. And I think normally rock documentaries, maybe you're lucky to get 3 or 4 sort of international showings at film festivals. And I think on the current count, we ended up doing about 48 of them around the world, which is unheard of for a music documentary. And now it seems to put us in a good position to, and a good team that work well to do more. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your writing process. I suppose that it's, you know, if you're working on a, you know, to a sort of script or a documentary, as it were, that there'll be some stuff that's fed to you. But you yourself, I don't know if there's anything you can tell us about your approach. Is there anything that you think that how you go about writing music and finding ideas?
I think I've always sort of been a guy that I'm not someone that works with music notation or whatever. I've always sort of had a bit of the approach that there's things in my hand or around that make noises and sounds, and I've always approached it a bit like kind of like a kid in a toy shop in that way, because and you know, and there's a lot of mystery to that as well, because there's lots, you know, I just sort of dive in really, and that's it really. I mean, I don't know, that's how I've always kind of worked like that. I mean, even with writing songs or whatever, I sort of felt that if I'd come at it the other way and had I been sort of classically trained in a way, I think sometimes that can almost be something that can constrict you in a way. I don't know, I mean, you'll
feel it out naturally, basically.
Yeah, I do.
Would you start with like a guitar riff or something and work out from there, or do you?
Sometimes, and certainly with the soundtrack stuff, you'd start with just strange noises and sounds, and especially when people are sort of talking about darker stuff or whatever, which is lovely, because then you can kind of start getting horror chords and discord and weird stuff going on, which maybe you I don't know, if you were maybe a bit more trained or whatever, you think, well, actually you can't do that. But in a way, I just think you actually can. It's all about sounds and experimentation with sounds, so in a way you can do whatever you want with that, and that's kind of what I do, and I think it seems to be working. So I'm getting away with it, really.
So, and I suppose talking a bit about this space, this room, and this facility that you've put together yourself. I mean, can you tell us a bit about why, you know, the whys and wherefores, like behind the thought of this room, and what brought this about?
I think on my return to Oxford, which was about 6, 7, 8 years ago, I kind of started to quickly realise that the budgets and, you know, the way that we used to make albums, i.e. going into big lovely studios and being able to afford the time to be in these places and use them, was disappearing. So you then have to think, okay, well, how can we, you know, you still make this work and still, you know, get, you know, so that you can basically get paid enough for your time, but the budgets are just not there anymore to go and use these studios, which is, I think, in a lot of ways sad, but in other ways it's quite liberating in the sense that you find different ways to make it work. And obviously now myself, I mean, Oxford as an example we have a studio in Oxford where we've always tracked bands, which a new studio now called Evolution, which, so there's always an aspect for tracking bands. And then what you realise is that once you've tracked and got all the music you need, you just want a facility where, for me, you then do the more time-consuming part of the process and make the decisions alone, in a way. And that is to get yourself a kind of mixing room scenario, which I had that in my other house. My older house sort of became a kind of mixed room thing, which was in an attic, and was, you know, it worked, but had its limitations. So now I've moved on to here. This is a little more purpose-built now for it. And of course, you know, which then leads on to the fact that it is still more of a home sort of scenario. I haven't spent, you know, 3 figures of, you know, thousands and thousands on, you know, I've done the basic sort of sound on sound kind of style.
The principles.
The principles of sound insulation and dampening within a room, and tried to, you know, work out the best of my knowledge, and also gone into places like the Sawmills, which were the classic studios, and measured sort of distances between speakers and back walls, you know, places that the studios, the bigger commercials studios back in the day, that we got great results from. I mean, including even places like Abbey Road, you know, that you kind of work out that when you come into your own situation, you know, with distances and ways that you can replicate that to a point, you know. But of course, then at a certain point, you realise that those scenarios can often be quite unbalanced. So hence, when Genelec and these speakers came into the arena, I kind of leapt for them, because I've ended up in a situation where, although outside of my sonic life it's never going to be that balanced, but certainly sonically I feel my life now is more balanced than it's ever been, you know, and that, which is the perfect solution for home, more studio situations, which I think are, from what I gather, that's the way where most music is being made these days.
So having a better monitor, a better set of references.
I mean, it's ultimately, you know, it's going to be the most important thing you spend your money on, really, you know. And if you're not hearing it, then how can you mix it, you know? So,
I mean, how did you come to these? I mean, these particularly as well. I'm a subscriber with Sound on Sound. Yeah. So on my various flights, I often read through, and I started reading about them in Sound on Sound, and just thought, oh, wait a minute. So these speakers have technology now that come and balance, you know, or calibrate to your room. Yeah. So I thought, that's superb. That's amazing. So I then started phoning and getting in touch with Genelec and to talk to them more about it. And I was already pretty convinced on the theory, and then after talking to Genelec,
after probably about 5 minutes of the conversation, I sort of thought, I'm totally convinced I've got to have these things. And I'd actually got Genelec speakers before. I'd used Dyne Audio. I'd used a few sets of monitors before, and as my main monitors, I just sort of thought, you know, that the Genelecs totally fit the bill.
I mean, can you describe sort of what was your first impression? Because you've tried them out, I guess, before.
Yeah.
Kind of, previewed them basically.
Yeah.
Do you remember your kind of first impressions, or sort of kind of went through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, first impression was detail, and just a feeling that, sonically, just a feeling balanced in the room, that you realise. My first impression was actually also a bit like, oops, I wish I could go back and maybe remix and do, you know, some of the previous albums that I've been mixing or whatever. But you know, because suddenly you realise that, you know, in those scenarios you still kind of make it work, you know, but it's a lot more tricky because you're dealing with the source is already a bit unbalanced, or the room's already a bit unbalanced, so you've still kind of got results from that. But yeah, my initial reaction was, and actually since I've been working and mixing with them, mixing's become quicker. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you know, life, you know, there's so many variables with music and bands and dealing with people and all sorts of stuff, that the more variables you can get out of the way, the better, you know. And so immediately, you know, I just felt that I just felt more comfortable and confident that, you know, in this mixing environment, and yeah, therefore work got quicker. Yeah,
and you're noticing more details and stuff in terms of like the fiddling around with things like reverb tails and stuff, where those details that sometimes get hidden. I mean,
for sure.
Things that,
yeah, I mean, absolutely. And the system I had before, which was sub heavy, was masking a lot of frequencies, for sure. And yeah, then I used to start to go and listen to, because I also like to reference always, you know, I have my music library, favourite records. I think I always reference things. I think that's, even any studio, even back in the day that I'd walk into, I'd always do that. I'd always start putting on records that I knew well to start getting a sense of what the room does and everything. So and of course from there on, someone had pointed the way to a strange film about called The Winged Beetle, which is about to bring up the conspiracy theories that is it Paul McCartney or Billy Shears that we know as Paul McCartney now, and of course all of the subliminal We Buried Paul and Paul is Dead in all the, which is great, you know, in all the Beatles records. So I started, you know, as well as many, I started listening to those, and you can hear those things so clearly, and you're thinking,
like literally going back to hear those clues.
But actually really clearly now. And also just I think also listen to things like, you know, Miles Davis, and just hearing the breath much more than you'd ever heard things on the track. Just the detail is like, I've never actually heard detail like that, you know. It's awesome. Which is, I mean, so you just hear much, you know, it's even beyond the music a little bit, you know, just the stuff around it, and just even, you know, rattly kind of seats and pedals and stuff, you know, and it's been quite interesting. But at the same time, you have to draw a stop point on that, because it's like, you're not getting so much work done. So I've unravelled all the subliminal messages of the Beatles and all of that. They definitely are there. I'm definitely hearing that, but in the end, it still doesn't really get you anywhere. So.
But you've been working with them for a while now. I mean, have you done sort of a bunch of work on them and have you played back stuff in other studios just to get comparisons? Like, do the mixes translate?
Totally.
Like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, within Oxford, we've also got it's quite a nice situation, because as well as the studios to make the music, this is one of the mix studios here in Oxford now, and then we've also got a great mastering engineer here who's got his own mastering situation in a residential situation as well. And what I noticed, that when I take mixes from here now to go to the mastering, he's kind of commented that actually these are the most balanced mixes you've made, and there's not so much I'm doing now on this. So I mean, and so in that situation, really you totally realise that it's, you know, it's working, and that things are just more balanced, and yeah.